Awesome.
Nice.
So welcome to episode 3 of the Lanky and OddCrapple podcast. As you can see on your screen, I am Crash, the OddCrapple, and he's taller than me, so he's lanky.
That's true.
But then again, I guess that argument stands true for everybody that's taller than me because everybody is taller than me, even most 10-year-olds. So
Ah,
I've met some pretty tall kids. Yeah.
that is true.
I had a classmate in 6th grade. We were 12 years old, and he was already 6'2". Yeah. Actually, I take that back. I had 2 classmates at 12 years old who were already 6'2".
It's in the genes.
And I don't even know where they could have bought jeans because they were so damn tall.
When did the big and tall section begin? Late 90s?
I don't know. I don't remember seeing it until I was in high school, I think. But in any case, today's topic is I don't recall where I saw this idea. I know I had messaged you about it on Facebook chat. I don't recall if I told you where I found it. But in any case, when I had my original YouTube channel back in 2012,
Oh,
there was I would do, random thought vlogs, kind of like I do now. But at one point, I was invited to my old high school, and my 11th grade English teacher, because I graduated in 2003. My 11th grade English teacher had asked me to come and speak to her seniors, because certain teachers have the ability to teach multiple grades. So she asked me to come speak to her seniors who were getting ready to graduate. And it was weird to me at first because, as social as I am in small groups of people that I'm familiar with, I never really thought of myself as somebody who was comfortable speaking in front of crowds, because prior to that, the only time I had ever done it, the people at the summer camp that I went to, they had asked me and another camper to write up speeches for the gala that they were holding, which was one of their fundraisers. And I think at the time I was probably 10 or 11, maybe. But I'm sitting there on a stage in front of probably 200 people, under a circus tent at what was then Six Flags Great Escape, but it wasn't Six Flags quite yet. Um, it was just the Great Escape in Splashwater Kingdom.
yeah.
But yeah, I was giving a speech about what it meant to be a camper at Double H Ranch. And honestly, other than pictures, I don't even know if I could tell you what the experience was like. I think I was so terrified that I blocked it out. And like that's what it was, kind of a deer in headlights moment for me. But like I said, I was probably less than 10 when I did it.
Oh,
What was semi-comforting to me was that the other girl that they had asked that was a camper happened to also be a girl that I grew up with, and she was a classmate of mine out or in regular school. So I was
Yeah.
familiar with her in the context of camp and in the context of school. So that was, rather comforting for me. Um, but yeah, it was quite the experience trying to I think I even got emotional while I was doing it. But like I said, I don't remember in great detail a lot of things that happened. But fast forward to when I had to give this speech to the kids in my English teacher's class. Um, the only thing that was weird to me at that time was this was 2011 or 2012 when she had asked me to do it. So it was just prior to me moving to Virginia. Um, and I hadn't yet been out of school um, for 10 years yet. Or had I? I don't know. No, I don't think I did because I think my 10-year reunion was just before I left because it would have been in 2013.
Okay.
And I left New York in August of 2013. So my 10-year reunion was in June of 2013. So my class reunion was just before I left New York. This or public speaking engagement happened a year or two prior. But in any case, my concern when I went to the high school was these kids are so far disconnected from my generation. What could I possibly have as far as knowledge to give them? Because even back then, I was of the opinion that everybody, whether they're everybody experiences things differently. Like you can do the same thing at the same time, but you're going to have a different experience.
Mm.
You're going to come away from it having learned something different. And so it was, I don't know if it was a fear, um, but I think my teacher knew that when I was in school, I hated being up in front of the class to give like oral reports. Um, and she knew that I typically froze when I was in front of people. So when I got to the school, I remember asking her, I was like, did you not have enough time in the course of 9 months to torture me? I'm like, you want to torture me more by making me do this? And, obviously she wasn't making me do it. I was the one that had to agree with it. But it ended up surprising me that I enjoyed it. And once I started talking, I looked around at these kids and they were actually engaged. Like eh, they were, I didn't feel like they were disconnected. Like I felt like they were listening to what I was saying. And it gave me this feeling of, wow, this might actually be something that I'm good at. So for a short time after that, I had actually looked at the possibility of becoming a public speaker because my teacher had gotten a hold of me after I had, probably about a week later, she got a hold of me, and she said that, the message that I gave to the kids was very well received, which again was a surprise to me. Even though they were very attentive, they actually asked questions during my presentation and whatnot. I went so far as to actually make this tells you how terrified I was, because I wanted to make sure that I was very prepared. I ended up making a PowerPoint presentation. I
Oh,
didn't even
cool.
I didn't even go that far to accomplish school projects. But for some reason, I was just something drove me to want to do a PowerPoint presentation. I think it was to take my mind off of being in front of a group of people who I did not know, and I did not
Mm.
know how they were going to react.
Now, what did you actually say? Do you have?
Well, she really didn't give me a specific topic to address. She gave me a very broad suggestion as far as explaining to them what to expect once they graduate. Um, and I think what was weird for me is the fact that what I experienced after graduation and what they presumably were about to experience after graduation was very different, because me and my situation, as far as trying to obtain and maintain employment, um it was a very different scenario than in any of them, because I had things that were obviously different about my that had to be different about my approach to employment than they would. So I had to kind of simplify things and make them very broad instead of specific,
Mm.
or general rather than specific. Sorry. Um, but it actually, like, speaking to them made me more comfortable in expressing ideas, because I've always been kind of on the edge about expressing what's going on in my head, um, because I don't know how it's going to be received. But their interaction with me while I was doing it, um, was very, relaxed, and very on par with um, what I was doing. And so it was just a very easy process to go through.
Oh.
I had kind of hoped that I was going to do it again before I left for Virginia, but we never could coordinate another one. Um, but that kind of made it easier for me to open up and speak to others about more intellectual things, and more things that I felt were actually worth talking about. Um, so it really helped, and I mean, even now living in Virginia, I still am trying to look for a way that I can do some public speaking. I don't know. I mean, I'm coming up in 10 days. It'll be 6 years since I've been in Virginia. Um, so I don't know if I will find that opportunity, or if this is going to be my way of public speaking, because I think that um, I think that this is a means of public speaking, but I think it takes away that element of having the crowd being able to interact with you, at least in some form. I know that we have the live chat, but I think in general, it takes away the ability to interact with the people you're speaking to. So the podcast format is better, like conversational podcast format. So to get to what we're doing today, or what we're talking about today, if you were tasked with writing a 45-minute speech, what subject would you choose and why? Because I think people today need a purpose, and I think that they need something to kind of connect with that helps them conduct themselves in a constructive and positive way. So I want to let you go first because I think that both of our topics can actually intertwine with each other and kind of work in conjunction with each other. But I want you to kind of take the reins and, explain, why you chose your topic and how you feel it may, impact other people. And just as an ending note, before I hand everything over to you, if anybody's interested, the videos that were taken of my public speaking engagement at my high school, they are actually on my channel. They were the first two videos that I ever uploaded on this channel that I have now. So if anybody wants to watch them, feel free. Um, I actually may link them in the description below once this is a video posted on my channel. But I want to hear what you're doing, what you're thinking as far as, your topic.
Yeah. It. Yeah. No. Honestly, it took me a while to finally come up with something. Because my original idea was the water supply of tungsten is running dangerously low, but it doesn't really give me a sense of purpose. So I ended up kind of using Randy Pausch as a model for a kind of a more purpose and meaningful topic for a speech, especially if it's 45 minutes and it has to be something you're passionate about. And I kind of took it if it were my last words or it's some written legacy that I would leave behind, I'd like it to be somewhat powerful. And I
And
just
just for the audience, I want to interject and say that I think we need a little bit more background as to who this person is that you mentioned, Randy.
yes, Randy Pausch. So
Mhm.
he was a computer science teacher um, at oh god, where was it? At Brown University. Oh no, that's
Okay.
his alma mater. Sorry. Oh crap.
Well, he was an educator.
Yes, at Carnegie Mellon, I believe. But yes, so he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer
Mhm.
and said that he had, he was told he had 3 to 6 months of good health left, um, and then death soon after. Um, but he is famous for his last lecture, and he spent his last class session talking to his students about achieving their dreams, living a full life, a life of meaning, driven by purpose, and completely different from the usual curriculum of a computer science lecture. And then he went on to write his book, The Last Lecture, with inspirational stories, quotes, and that sort of thing, just trying to inspire people to pursue what they're passionate about, to believe in something, to make the world a better place throughout your lifetime.
Mhm.
And I really think it was a really cool message, and even that is downplaying it. He's actually a great inspiration for a lot of people,
Mhm.
and that was kind of my MO for deciding, well, maybe I should take this a bit more seriously and go in a more inspirational approach to it.
Mhm.
So I, and again, this is actually also going to sound very broad, but my topic would be, and just for the record, we're not going to actually read a speech
Right.
on the
Yeah.
show. So yeah, my topic would be empowering people to drive change, ideally positive change, in the world. Um, and actually, to some extent, I would argue Mr. Rogers is also kind of an inspiration to this. He was a bit more soft-spoken and gentle in his words, but I would argue he had a really good message that ultimately, no matter who you are, worthy of love. That you are worth something to this world, and you have your place in it. And since the world belongs to everyone, and I guess this is kind of more my take on it. We as a people have a duty to make it better in any way that we can, whether major or just tiny little acts of kindness. Um, and I, I, I I don't want to undervalue the actions of a single person that can just grow and grow just with the seed of a single idea, and then just blossom into this movement, and you know changing the path of a nation, or changing a worldview. And I would love to be able to inspire people in such a way that they believe in themselves, and that they have something good to unleash on the world.
Mhm.
Um, and I know in this world it can be tough because, and actually, I guess you kind of alluded to this earlier, that the academic settings, when you spend 12, 16, 20 years in school, it is very different from the real world.
Oh yeah.
Depending on your teachers, uh, it can be well, okay. School and academic life can be very harsh, or it can actually be a place of growing and self-discovery. And again, depending on the quality of teachers, I was lucky enough to have pretty damn good teachers throughout my academic career that encouraged the students to, pursue different things, test your capabilities, your strengths, weaknesses. Um, and so I was lucky. I grew up in a really amazing academic environment, and not everyone is the same way. Sometimes when they get out into the world, it actually might be easier.
Mhm.
But I know for a lot of people, uh, school can be very cloistering, and you get a very narrow microcosm of what you think the world is like beyond the walls of a school. And it's completely different. So in an academic setting, one can be very easily empowered if they're doing well in school, or a star in football, or they got the lead in the school play, or something like that. Whereas in the real world, there's a whole lot more people, a whole lot of competition, and it can eat away at you and your self-esteem and your sense of self-worth, and just this race that has been ingrained in our minds that we have to make money, we have to be married by age 30, we got to make a living to pay our bills and go on vacations, and also pay for food, rent, utilities, that sort of thing. And we kind of forget about our dreams, just because this pervasive sense of utility is always in front of us. And again, we're reminded every month, well, we got to pay the rent, we got to pay the utilities, I got to go grocery shopping, fill my car with gas. And very few of us can actually break away from those chains, and I guess, to use the term we used in a previous podcast, venture onto this path of self-actualization. And again, that path is different for everyone, but I really think if we are going to walk that path with a consistency of positivity, we need to believe in ourselves, and believe that we are worth doing something great in the world. And I'm wondering, like, how do you do that? How do you inspire people to achieve greater things without the focus of money or prestige or fame or whatever else, these kind of more superficial I don't know, recognition? Like, where do you leave a lasting place in the world? And ultimately, it doesn't matter how rich you are, how intelligent you are, how strong you are. It really depends. I would argue how good you are as a person. And I would love to inspire people to see the good within themselves enough for that just to spill out into the world. And it is tough because all of us have our own insecurities, our own biases of, what is the good. And actually, as a philosopher, no one actually knows what that is in its entirety quite yet. You know, thousands of years later, we're still asking that question, what is the good? But I think innately, all of us have this intuitive sense of what the good is and how to make society better for everyone. And I would love to be able to inspire people, to make that a reality, to make that their main thing. That's what gives their life meaning. It drives a more purposeful, more purposeful actions in life, and to get people to see that there is good in yourself and there is good in everyone else that needs to be brought out. And I think if people were able to understand that commonality, that major thing that actually makes us all equal, is that we all have that capacity to do good and ultimately to do great things in the world and with our lives. And that ultimately it comes down to a choice. Because oddly enough, anyone's moral character, that ability, the ability to do good, comes down to the choice to do so. And that can happen at any time we want, instantaneously. And if there are enough drivers in each of our lives to help push us toward that conclusion, that each of us has that capacity to do good and to do great things, at just the choice to do so, each of us could do so much with our lives. but then we have so many pushbacks in life. And how do you overcome that? And ultimately, that choice to do good, once you make that choice, it becomes a manner of traveling. So no matter what you're doing in your life, if you have a 9 to 5 job every day, even if you hate it,
Mhm.
hopefully you like it, and it'll keep life more palatable.
Yeah.
But no matter what you do, how you treat people, that itself can change the world,
Mhm.
because it's a ripple effect, and each of our lives, leaves these rippling rings in causality throughout time and space. So I guess that would be my speech, in a nutshell. It would be that there's good in all of us, and that all of us are capable of great things if we choose to do so by making that choice to bring the good in ourselves out into the world.
I
So there you go.
I'm going to challenge something you said
Ah,
based on what James just said in the chat. So I'm going to bring this up
ah,
because this actually harkens back to what we were trying to discuss before we went live. Um, and this is basically, the difference in the way that people live their life and the way that people understand a way of life because they have different circumstances. So I
mm,
want you to think. I'm going to put this up on the screen. I want you to you know give me your thoughts on this because uh I think it goes back to what we were talking about before we went live in respect to being willing to understand both sides. And if one side is somewhat misguided, the the understanding that you have to show them where they made an error without alienating them. And like we were saying, there are certain subjects that one will approach in making their argument that I think are ineffective in, making their argument for them. Because I think that it, as long as you are able to get your point across without alienating the values that somebody holds, I think that you are going to be more effective in your approach. And I think what James said is extremely relevant because obviously there are people in general understand what is good and what is bad. Like there are very specific examples of what is good and what is bad. It's just kind of one of those things that it's kind of an unspoken kind of reality that there are things that are good and bad. We know that. But beyond that, what one person sees as effective, another person may not. But I think the approach that you take is what matters because as long as you're not harming somebody, then I don't and you don't actually have like malicious intent, then I don't think that your actions should be considered bad.
uh, actually, you have a good point there. So for my part, I'm kind of going to take this probably in more of a Buddhist notion of good, bad, that sort of thing. And I would argue that I think we all have to can admit that there is suffering in the world.
Mhm.
Um, and I would say any action taken to mitigate the suffering of someone, whether it be one person throughout the entirety of society, or if everyone is suffering, um, actions need to be taken to help alleviate that suffering, and that's what society is for. It's for all of us to work together toward a common goal, a common betterment, uh,
Mhm.
to live well. Um, and so I would say any action taken to help prevent or uh, erase or alleviate the suffering of another would be considered good. Um, and also, on another Buddhist notion, the ability to show compassion to everyone, uh, I think, is crucial toward a functioning society and the ability to enable the good to spill out into everyone's lives. And I know the political landscape, I know we've talked about this earlier, can be a very confusing and convoluted, rambly, pool to wade through. Uh, and I think we need to articulate our initial beliefs in order to find a more surefire, you know, I guess, policy or solution to these problems of suffering in the world. And again, it is a split world. There is, each nation to its own, and then each nation has its provinces or states, and then, certain areas, and, no two people are the same. So there are going to be disagreements. But I would say deep down that there is an ultimate good, and I think we have to talk about it, have conversations civilly about what that is, and how to make society better for everyone, no matter who you are. And I would,
Um, yeah, I agree, but I also have to put in there that what one person thinks is effective, I don't think that judging that approach in a negative way is effective until you know whether it works, because no no specific action is going to completely eliminate a problem. It takes understanding both sides of the argument. And I think because no two people think alike, not even, twin siblings. No two
mm,
people think alike. Um, so I think you have to be willing to concede that, you know, because of because of the environment that somebody's in, they may have a different approach than you. But the thing is, I think the difference is understanding each other's approach and finding common ground.
yeah. And I mean, as long as the approach itself doesn't hurt people, I'd
Well,
say,
but
try
I,
it.
well, James also just did say something. He said, if you act to remove suffering from one, but it leads to suffering later unintentionally, is that then bad? Would it be better to not help now to remove future pain? And I think that as long as your actions have good intentions, I think that they are noble. If you act in such a way, if you act with malice, then yes, I agree that, those actions are things that need to be, condemned.
Yeah.
But I think that as long because you're acting based on the knowledge that you have. You're acting against something based on the knowledge that you have. No two people are going to have the same level of knowledge of something.
No. And I would argue you are correct on that. It is the intention that is indicative of character. And Immanuel Kant, kind of said the same thing. If each of us has, a duty to do the right thing, and what that is ultimately is to alleviate suffering, so that society can function as it's supposed to. We're all supposed to help take care of each other, promote mutual well-being. Um, and then there is this again, thought experiment where do you save baby Davros? Uh,
Your inner nerd is showing, Ethan.
well, and actually, this was I did get up to this episode in Doctor Who. So okay, the Doctor had this opportunity to save a child. He didn't know who it was, but he was in this minefield, and
Yes, yes. It was during Capaldi's run. Yes,
yeah, and so there was this dilemma where the Doctor was trying to comfort him. You know, uh, I'll he didn't know his name at the time. So it was like, don't
right.
worry, just stand still. I'm coming to get you. And he was trying to, comfort him, like, talk him down and that sort of thing. He's like, what's your name? And the kid, again, like 6 or 7 years old, said Davros. And then all you see suddenly in the Doctor's eyes, like, oh shit. I mean, he didn't say that, but in his
Right.
eyes, he could feel that. And then credits.
Yeah.
And then this whole episode was this moral dilemma of, what do you do as a person? Do you save a child from dying, knowing that this child is going to become a mass murderer? Or do you play the evil role and leave this child behind and leave him to die?
Or could your actions ultimately lead to his future changing? That you have to look at it from multiple angles.
And that's the thing. And this is where the future becomes dangerous, because we don't know what the future holds. So everything is hypothetical. So just because there might be something bad in the future, there might be an equal chance that there's something good in the future. So all you have to work on now is the information you have at this moment of, do I do this thing or do I do this thing? Do I not do anything? And if you wish to be a good person, you have to go with the good choice now,
Hmm.
because the future is never promised.
Right. And James actually also just said something um, that I think is extremely, relevant to what we're talking about. He said, good and bad, you can't define universally. But if something benefits the self versus benefits others, you can calculate that. So I think if you approach something with the intention of, you know, helping the many versus helping the few, I think that, your intentions are noble.
Yeah.
Um, but that actually leads me into the um, the topic that I decided for if I was going to make a speech. Um, People have heard me refer to one of the videos I did on my channel when Luke Perry passed away. I had found a quote from him that really it really kind of hit me. Um, his quote was, "I want I don't want my life to happen to me. I want to happen to my life. And I feel like that is extremely powerful, especially with from a social perspective. What we're seeing a lot of now is people acting out because they have a lack of understanding of the people that they're acting against. And I think that we need to be more willing to come to the center and find middle ground and understand why people are doing the things that they're doing instead of acting against them because we disagree with them. Because the minute you act against somebody because you disagree with them, that is acting with malice. And I do not think that acting with malice in any way, it doesn't help the situation. So
Mhm.
understanding why somebody is doing something before you act is, I think, what we need to, work to achieve. Because we're obviously no two people are going to experience the same thing, even doing the same task. So we need to understand each other's perspective to figure out how we can work together. If we're not willing to understand the other side's perspective, we're not going to be effective in the greater community.
I would agree. Being able to understand one another it essentially erases any bumps.
Well,
Uh,
I would argue that
and
we all have the ability to understand each other, but I think what's missing is the willingness.
and on top of that, each of us has our own values that we may hold
Right,
higher than
but
another,
but that
or
falls into how willing we are to understand somebody. We will discover that we each have our own personal values, but I think at the core of it, it's the willingness versus the ability, because I think the willingness is completely absent. Well, not completely absent, because obviously, you and I have very effective conversations, albeit some of them are a little bit more intense than others. Um,
off
but
camera.
well, yeah. But I mean, even when we were doing the discussions podcast, I think, a couple times, we did get a little bit intense with, our differences in opinion. But
Ah,
I think there needs to be more of a willingness across the board to understand, each side, so that you can have a more well-rounded understanding.
and actually, that is a very good point because I would argue, the wiser you are, the more capable you'd be to understand what is, the good, and you're not going to be able to do that if you can't speak to one another. Like
Mhm.
we live in a society, and at well, I guess maybe this is a bit of an exaggeration, but at our fingertips, we can speak with anybody, and
Oh,
this is
I don't think it's an exaggeration at all, because when you and I were growing up, um, and the internet became a public thing, like available to the public, they said this will connect you with everybody around the world.
yeah,
And it did, but I think it only lasted for a short time until social media came into it, because I think that people started focusing more on the differences that they had with each other than the commonalities. And I think that that's where the disconnect happened, where we see, to go back to, I think, our previous episode where we talked about escapism, a lot of people weren't finding people they could connect with in their, in their everyday life. So they got on the internet and were trying to find people that maybe had the same experiences or thoughts than them. And maybe once they understood those, they were more willing to interact with people who maybe had different experiences and thoughts. But I think that we've just gotten to a point where people are more focused on, this person is bad because they don't think the same way. And I think that now what the internet that we used as, you know, a means of escapism, I think we need to escape from that to find ourselves again.
And that's an interesting point. Because with communication so easy,
Hmm.
we tend to go toward what is comfortable, and then each of us kind of either stick with our tribe or our echo chambers, and we don't venture beyond that, because it might be uncomfortable or what have you, and that is the danger to global internet. um, but also, if we choose to do it, we can also come together, because all it takes is a conversation with someone else to at least better understand them. It may not be a complete understanding by the end of the conversation, but at least there's a tidbit of knowledge, shared between the conversationalists.
Hmm.
And it's it would ultimately be our ability to be civil to one another,
Hmm.
if we wish to speak a little bit more objectively and actually learn something,
Yeah.
while sharing our thoughts and opinions and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it not all of us have that maturity for civility yet. But then again, that can also be worked on, if you choose to do so.
Um,
But you have to question your own biases.
yeah, and I think, in actually, just to kind of push a little on, what we were talking about before we went live. n- Again, I think it goes back to the willingness. You have to be willing to, you know, challenge your own biases.
Yeah,
And I do think, I mean, even within um the conversations that you and I have, I think that there are times where both of us tend to, you know, be a little bit more stuck in our biases sometimes. But I do think that, at least, hopefully, to a certain point, we're getting to a place where, we will start questioning our own thoughts and our own perspectives. Because I think you have to question your own thoughts and perspectives before you can question somebody else's.
you know, uh, and then you have to prove that, because you
Well,
also,
to say you have to prove it, I mean, you can you can prove it to yourself, but if you try to prove it to somebody else, they may see something differently.
yes. But also, I don't want anyone to get to the point where they're gaslighting themselves, because that can open themselves up to exploitation or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, and I would argue, get to if we could get to objectivity, that would be the ideal, I suppose. Um, but yeah, it can be tough to understand the other, because there are no one leads the same life, and
Hmm.
no two people are the same. So everyone is going to be different in some way. The trick is to find that commonality between
Hmm.
all of humanity. And actually, oddly enough, uh, I know for a fact one commonality is our fallibility.
Yeah.
The fact that we can all make mistakes,
Oh
that
yeah.
we're not perfect, that I think is at least humbling to all of us,
Hmm.
and maybe bring us closer together. I'm not sure, depending on how big your ego is, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's it is tough
I,
in a big world.
among along the lines of ego, I mean, part of me wants to think that the absence of ego would be a lot more healthy, but I think ego does need to exist for the ability to become humble. Because I think if ego didn't exist, I don't think that I think ego, just like escapism, I think ego can be a good and bad thing because ego allows you to take pride in the things that you accomplish. But if your ego is acting against your ethics and your morals and, you know, harms somebody in some way, that's where ego can be bad. So I think that there just needs to be a conscious willingness to balance.
And yeah, and I I guess I would argue the what is it? The super ego? Is that the self
I
that's
don't know if I've ever heard that.
a little bit higher minded? And I would say that would be you kind of have to go beyond the self while also putting the self within the context of a larger world. And I would argue that lends itself to opening the self up to maturity. Um, because the larger your world is, uh, and probably the better you can define what is the good.
Hmm.
Because again, if we stick to a more tribalistic sense of the good, then it's going to be, well, my friends need food, so we're going to steal this food from this tribe and bring it ours, and that's the good. Um, but we can't live that way. As
Well, along those lines, I think you have to, you have to measure the impact that your actions are going to have before you take them, because I do think that leave it to me in the middle of a stream to get the hiccups. Um,
I burped earlier,
oh, I didn't even notice.
silently.
Um,
Good.
I think that you have to measure the impact of your actions before taking them, because I do think that um, to a certain degree, there is a country, and I don't know what country it is. They do allow theft of goods if it's for the purpose of, you know, keeping one healthy. I like stealing from a market.
Mm.
Now I'm speaking, to like as like a third world country. So like the open markets that you see on the side streets, they are less apt to try and penalize you if you're trying to just stay alive, as opposed to if you're somebody who's well off and you're just being a dick.
There is an element of
But I think what it boils down to is you have to take a measured approach to everything. You have to measure you have to measure your approach, and you have to measure the impact of your approach. And I think that will help you determine, how best to achieve, a singular goal.
yeah. Every action does require some forethought, at least. Uh, and yeah, if you have the ability to measure it, um, God, and actually just yesterday I saw this video that, is it possible to measure everything? I know we use dollars as kind of the go-to
Hmm.
default setting for is, a cost benefit analysis, is this action worth it or not, that sort of thing. But then there's so many other variables
Hmm.
besides monetary cost. Um, like honestly, uh, if my actions were to do good for humans
Mhm.
versus good for the environment. Like if I do good for humans and my action has a negative impact toward the environment, then what becomes the good? Because
Well,
it's a whole different.
then if your actions are good as it pertains to affecting humans, then you can circle back and maybe fix the damage that you did to the environment. Because if humans exist, we have the ability to fix the environment. Now, I know the argument. There could be the argument that if humans didn't exist, the environment could fix itself. But I think that if you take action that creates unbalance in the environment, but it helps the humans that live in that ecosystem, that the humans that still exist in that ecosystem have the ability to then go back and fix that, imbalance.
And then that kind of circles back to what I said earlier. We have to define ourselves within a larger world. And if we choose to live in a broader society, a global economy, uh, our entire planet is also part of our social system. And we also have the duty to take care of it. We have to
Hmm.
be good stewards. And that it also plays a role in the good actions we need to take in order to better the lives of everyone. Because ultimately, what's good for society, again, in the broader sense, is good for everyone.
Hmm.
And I include, animals and plants as well as people in that everyone. Um,
But would you concede that two people who have opposing views but are working toward the good of the environment and society, do you agree that they could put their heads together and come to a middle ground to be able to put both of their plans into action?
yeah. I mean, if it's just a difference of approach, but you have the same belief, or same motives or what have you, uh, then I think it will just down to either trial and error, trying one solution versus the other, which one works better, or compromising, uh, or coming up with an entirely different solution that you both agree on.
Mhm.
That you have a couple different options in that regard. I think any difference would be a difference in ultimate goals, maybe.
Mhm.
Um, and that might be a little bit. Uh,
Well, I mean, I think sticking along the lines of if we have the same goal but a different approach, um, I think that I think that creates the breeding ground for finding commonality.
yeah,
I think as long as we have the same goal, it doesn't matter how we approach it as long as we're not hurting and alienating the opposing side. Because I think that if we're not intentionally harming the other side, we're more apt to be willing to see what approach they're taking and maybe add each other's approach into one.
yeah. I mean, and again, I'm not sure if you have any examples on hand, but uh, if someone wanted to paint a house, and two people were living in it, uh, and one wanted to paint the house green, the other wanted to paint the house yellow. How?
I've got a better one. Not taking away the difference in color because I think that's too specific. I think a better way to approach it is approaching it based on one person using a brush as opposed to another using a brush roller.
Ah.
what's more effective and what's going to get the job done quicker so that you can move on to the next common goal.
You know, yeah, that's actually a good point, and I think the two have to come together to talk about it, because it also depends on the exterior of the house. If they have, oh god, what are those? You know how they're overlap. The side of a house.
Siding, like
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, like siding.
because you actually need a brush to get under the
Right.
siding.
And but so both approaches have their benefits, but for the overall completion of the project, the roller is going to be more effective, but then you can go back in and touch up the spots that the roller didn't get.
Yeah,
Neither of you are alienating the other's approach, but you're getting the common, goal accomplished. And one of the things that I saw over the weekend was the third movie of the Descendants, the Disney's Descendants. It's the kids of the villains of Disney,
hmm,
and um, just for a little perspective, the first two movies focused on, because the kids, the descendants of the Disney villains, live on an island. The main the mainland is called Oradon, and you have like Belle and the Beast, and all of the, like, the Disney princesses and the princes living in Oradon, but you have the kids of the villains and actually the villains themselves living on this island. In the first movie, the the daughters of Maleficent and the Evil Queen and the son of Jafar and the son of Cruella de Vil, they all find their way into Oradon, and they initially, not knowing the environment, they still act in a way that they're familiar with, stealing to get what you want. But they eventually acclimate to this new environment, and they realize, hey, this could be a better life for me if I just change my approach, because this is a different environment. And it continues into the second movie, and actually the son of Belle and the Beast falls in love with the daughter of Maleficent, and the kingdom of Oradon, they are very hesitant because Mal, as she's called, has a very aggressive way of approaching things. But because um, the son of Belle and the Beast decided to give her a chance and understand her, she was able to kind of scale, or kind of dial back her approach towards things and find a more effective way to do things. When the first movie start or when the first movie, I'm sorry, when the third movie just aired, um unfortunately, they did go a little political, but they did it in such a way that it fit into the previous two movies. It fit into the storyline, so it wasn't overtly political. But Belle and the Beast asked Mal what she thought about opening up um, the barrier that they had between the island and Oradon. And she said, I don't think that it's wise to open up the barrier. And she goes, I think we should permanently close it. And the son of Belle and the Beast was very, very adamantly against this. And, they had a disagreement about it. Well, it ended up that um, the daughter of Sleeping Beauty, Princess Aurora is, I guess, Sleeping Beauty's real name. I never actually knew that.
Hmm.
But the daughter of Aurora was so mad that Ben, who is the son of Belle and the Beast, she was so mad that Ben ended up falling in love with Mal that she decided to go into this kind of storage unit where they have the weapons and the spell books that the villains used, and she decided to become evil herself to try and get back at Mal and the people that she thought were responsible for her not being with Ben. So she was good and turned bad because she felt somebody wronged her. But when that happened, Mal had a change of heart as far as her approach toward closing the barrier to the island. She actually went back to the island, got some of her friends who were also kids of the villains, and she said, "We're the only ones that can stop this because we're the only ones that know how." And so she had to trust in people that she didn't trust before. But she had to realize that they had abilities and ways of going about things that could be effective and cause the least amount of damage. So she eventually changed her entire, way of thinking and said, "I don't think we should have the barrier anymore. Let's open it up." And she started, realizing that whether you are perceived as good or perceived as bad, you possess both. It's just you have to be willing to take the more positive approach. And you can only do that if you're given that opportunity.
And that's important too. Opportunity matters in life in general. Uh, and and I guess for my part, that was part of my motive for my reason for the speech. The topic of my speech would
Mm-hmm.
be empowering people to choose to do good as opposed to act selfishly or that sort of thing. And uh it can be tough because the life can throw quite a few things at you that you may not be prepared for, or like just for the sake of survival you have to do things a little uncharacteristic. And you can see this in a lot of movies and that sort of thing, where an otherwise good protagonist or something has to do something dark and evil in order to stay alive or something
Yeah.
like that. And yeah, life has a way of throwing wrenches into things.
Because even within the Disney movies, um, you know, look at if you look at Jafar in Aladdin, he acted with malice. Like his entire approach was acting with malice.
Hmm.
And he eventually lost and he was completely, you know, they rid the area of Jafar. But if you look at those who acted with him, like Iago, the bird that was voiced by Gilbert Godfrey, Iago was able to kind of adapt to Jafar being gone and realize that that he was following somebody who was completely approaching things with malice. And
Mm.
he was for at least for a short time, he changed his ways. I don't recall if he ever went back to being, a jerk, but um, it was, and I think you have to pick and choose who you are influenced by, but you have to have the wherewithal and the willingness to be willing or be able to criticize that person that you're being influenced by. And if you're willing to call them out when they go to an extreme, then I think that it's a good thing because you realize that they're not always going to have the answers, but you have to encourage them to work with somebody that they may, fundamentally disagree with, and maybe they'll find a collective answer that helps, the common goal without alienating one side or the other.
Yeah. And I would just argue, I think Iago has always been a lovable jerk. I'm gonna.
Yeah, because I saw him kind of as a sarcastic jerk and just somebody. I don't know if you ever watched. Was it Boy Meets World? Did you ever watch Boy Meets World with
Yeah, as a kid.
with Ben Savage? Do you remember? I think it was Frankie and Johnny, the two bullies, like the big guy and the really scrawny guy with the longer hair.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, if you look at it from that perspective, Frankie, and actually, those two were the lackeys of a bigger bully named Harley Kiner. I'm really old. I cannot believe I remember all of this stuff, but they were the lackeys for Harley, and if you remember, Frankie and Johnny both had an affinity, or I don't know if the affinity is the right word, but they were more inclined to approach something with compassion than they were aggression. Whereas Harley, because of his background, was more inclined to approach it with aggression more than compassion. But there were times that you saw Harley approaching things with compassion because it was situational. And I think that you just have to allow people to react. You have to allow people to react in certain situations, and then if they react in a way that exacerbates the problem, maybe give them, perspective that might help them further down the road if they encounter the same thing.
Yeah. And yeah, and again, what you alluded to earlier, that each of us has some influence over another in some
Mhm.
way. It could be minuscule, it could be larger. If, but uh, we can change if we want to, and the people we surround ourselves with uh, can also help either guide us or hinder us
Yeah.
to make that change. So yeah, a lot of it can be environmental, especially with so many freaking influences, and again with a global internet.
I
But
have
yeah,
I have to criticize you for the way that you said we can change if we want to, because that just put the safety dance in my head. And now all I can think is we can dance if we want to, we can leave our friends behind.
roll
But
credits.
if our friends don't dance, and if they don't dance, then they're no friends of mine. Thank you for putting that in my head.
You're welcome.
You'll pay for that.
Well, it's also one of my favorite songs. So
Yeah, I mean, it comes on the radio periodically, or it'll come on the my assistant over there. I'm not saying the name because it'll activate, but um, it'll come on, and I'll sit there and I'll blast it up. I love the song, but it's just I have such a music brain that if somebody says something similar to a music lyric, that song gets stuck in my head for however long it wants to.
oh jeez, I'm sorry.
No, no. Like I said, it's a good song. If it was a really bad, I don't think bad songs get stuck in my head, or at least I don't recall any. Um, but yeah, it's weird how randomly it happens. Um, but Yeah, I just think that we need to be willing to acknowledge that we have personal bias toward things, toward everything. It doesn't matter what,
Mm.
it doesn't matter, what our bias is towards. I think we have a bias towards everything because we have ways in living life that work for us. But I don't think that we should argue somebody else's way of approaching something because unless they know that, something else exists, they are going to approach a situation in the manner that they know best. And we can only hope that the outcome is, you know, positive or, at least not, entirely negative. So I think that we have to, as long as we acknowledge the fact that we have personal bias towards life in general, then I think that I think we're drawing ourselves closer to the center in being able to find common ground with the people that we disagree with. But I will say, just to push back on something we talked about before we started recording, I do think that there are topics that should not be used to push a point across because I do think that it is important for people to stick to their morals and values as long as their morals and values don't harm somebody else. But to use somebody's morals and values against them to make a point, I think that is extremely dangerous. And I think it, you know, I think it's very harmful to relationships.
Huh. Uh, and yeah, I don't know, but I mean, and again, it's kind of ties with each of us having our own set of morals, values, uh, biases. We're all individuals. Like we all have a self, and uh,
We have to be open to learning from others because if we learn from others, we may see something we didn't see before, and
yeah,
we may be able to apply it to our own, approach. And I think if we're willing to learn from each other instead of saying, you know, this person thinks differently than me or does something differently than me, I'm not going to give them the time of day. I think that as long as we're willing to concede that they may have a perspective that we didn't consider before, I think we will be a lot better off. I think we'll be a lot more mentally, emotionally, and socially healthy.
yeah, and that's the thing that willingness to understand one another just opens the doors to be able to work together.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm all for that.
Yeah, like I said, I just think very strongly that there are subjects that should not be used to, you know, put a point across. I really think that there are subjects that are too close to somebody's morals and values that if you use your perspective on those, it alienates that person, and I think it completely destroys your, I think it destroys your ability to convey your message. So
Mm,
I think that when to harken back to the whole purpose of this podcast, I think that with public speaking, you need to be as specific as possible to get your point across, but I think you need to be as neutral as possible. I think you need to have a very strong understanding of both sides of an argument because if you get people pushing back against your perspective, you need to be able to understand why they may have that perspective.
yeah, and I would always argue. that asking the question why is a nice default conversation starter. Because that way you can get explanations and answers, and it opens the doors to understanding the other. And which is why I love asking questions.
Yeah.
Whenever possible,
Yeah.
as long as I can think of them.
But
But
as long as when you ask the question, you don't stick to you don't stubbornly stick to your personal bias, because even I've done that before.
yeah, I think we all have.
Yeah, I think that's just human nature. But I mean, I think to better heal, social interaction, we need to be more willing to understand the person sitting next to us without our personal bias.
Yeah, and that's I would say that comes with either experience or what. But when you get to that level of maturity, you're more able to put your bias on a shelf, and then hopefully speak a little bit more objectively about topic X.
Mhm.
And then during that conversation, does it prove or disprove this belief? And
Well, I think that bias should only exist when it comes to your own personal morals and values, because your own personal morals and values, you have the choice whether those are going to impact somebody else. More often than not, they're going to only impact the way that you live your life. If you use your morals and values to impact the way somebody else lives their life, that is acting with malice.
but
Because if you act, I mean, if you act with the purpose of trying to influence somebody else to think the way that you do, I think that is, malicious. And because you're using your morals and values instead of using something that is can be factually proven.
okay. Oh, like oh well, okay. I didn't want to put anyone under the bus, but I know in some instances when I see people walking the streets knocking on doors, do I open the door or not? I'm like, oh
Um,
geez, this conversation isn't going to go well.
it's actually funny you mentioned that, because I was watching something the other day, and this girl was dressed up as she was getting ready to go to a convention of some sort. She was dressed up as um, Mystique, or a version of Mystique that I've never seen before. I
Oh,
think it was strictly from the comics. She was dressed up as Mystique, and they came to her door, because I know who you're talking about. They came to her door, and because of the way that she looked, she scared the ever loving hell out of them. And she said that she never saw them again.
I guess that works. So,
Yeah. Um, but yeah, I saw that video the other day, and I was cracking up.
but during that time, did she find God?
I don't know. I
Accept
know.
Jesus as her Lord and Savior?
Yeah. Let's not get into that, because that'll just create a whole mess of.
That'll be our next podcast.
Yeah. No. 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 Um, but I do think that a lot of I think a lot of progress was made in the context of this discussion. Um, as long as we carry that understanding going forward, I think that people will be a lot better off if they learn to you know embrace their morals and values, whether you want to call it that or their personal bias. Embrace their personal bias for their own life as long as it doesn't affect somebody else's life.
Yeah, and again, to mitigate suffering, um, it's a rough world. No one needs to suffer
Yeah.
needlessly.
And
So
actually, James just said in the chat, most people argue to win, not debate and understand, not to debate and understand.
that's another sad
Well,
point.
I'm sorry. Most people argue to win, not debate to understand. And I think that while I wouldn't call what we do debating, I think that we converse along the lines of our personal biases to understand where we are, even if it does get a little heated sometimes.
Yeah, but again, I grew up studying philosophy, and I absolutely hated debating. Um, so my MO now is to understand other people's perspectives, because if we can come to some sort of understanding mutually, um, then that just makes uh, the mind's eye is open that much more
Mhm.
for everyone, because you can see other perspectives. You can see how this one thing may not work in your life, but it works in other people's lives really well, or vice
Mhm.
versa. Um, and yeah, it's that that search, that willingness for mutual understanding is crucial to any conversation or any debate. Um, if you're in it to win it, you're doing it wrong. That's what I
Yeah,
would say.
I think that we have to I think we have to work to understand each other. I think we have to how do I say this? I think we have to our intention has to be to understand each other so that we understand ourselves better. Because I think understanding I think understanding a perspective that's different from our own, I think understanding that helps us better form our better grow our perspective.
Yeah, I mean, actually, by understanding multiple perspectives, your world gets that much bigger.
Right. But I do think that for the sake of, balance, I do think that bias still does need to agree or exist, I'm sorry, because I don't think that two people can approach the same thing the same way.
Yeah, and realistically speaking, no one's going to completely erase all of their bias.
Yeah.
Uh,
But I think there's bias is fine as long as, you depending on your approach toward
yeah,
or to that bias.
as long as you're not hurting anyone.
Right.
So
But yeah, this was a good chat. I'm happy with where it went. I don't have the Facebook chat pulled up, so I don't know if we've decided on a topic for next week as of yet. But for anybody that is seeing this or sees it after it's posted as a video on demand, if there are topics you want us to cover, serious topics, nothing, you know, off the wall, just to, comment. Um, I don't really think that those are constructive or productive of in any way. Um, if there are things that you would like to understand better by hearing somebody else's perspective, let us know, reach out to us, comment on this video. Um, but if unless you have anything else, I think that's where we can safely end this.
awesome. Yeah,
All
I got
right.
nothing. So
All right. We will have contact information in the description below, and we will see everybody next week. Bye.
Toodles.
Toodles, really? That's how you're gonna end this? Well, it's a live stream. We're not editing it.
Dare to be bold.
You being bold, I don't see it. Bye, everybody.